The rain-slicked streets of New York City gleamed under the flickering streetlights. But Ethan Carter barely noticed as he sprinted through the downpour, his heart pounding louder than the thunder overhead. He was late again, in the thought of Caleb waiting, his perfect suit soaked through, twisted Ethan's gut with guilt. Tonight was supposed to be their night, the one moment they could steal from the chaos of their wildly different lives. Ethan, a 27-year-old mechanic with calloused hands and a past heavier than the toolbox he carried, had no business falling for someone like Caleb Thornton. Caleb was 29, a corporate lawyer whose world sparkled with penthouse views and tailored suits, a man who could buy anything but time. Yet, in a city that thrived on division, rich versus poor, uptown versus downtown, their love had ignited like a spark in a storm, fierce and impossible to ignore. They'd met 6 months ago at a dive bar in Brooklyn, a place Ethan frequented after long shifts at the garage, and where Caleb, on a rare night off, had wandered in, looking gloriously out of place. Ethan had been nursing a cheap beer, his flannel shirt stained with motor oil, when Caleb slid onto the stool beside him, his polished demeanor clashing with the bar's gritty charm. One glance, Ethan's hazel eyes meeting Caleb's piercing blue, and something unspoken passed between them. A conversation about nothing turned into everything, and by the end of the night, they were laughing under a street lamp, the world fading away. Now, Ethan dodged puddles, his sneakers splashing through the rain as he raced toward the tiny park where they'd agreed to meet. It was their secret spot, a forgotten corner of the city where skyscrapers didn't loom and judgment didn't follow. Caleb was already there, leaning against an oak tree, his umbrella shielding him from the worst of the storm. Even drenched, he looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine, his blonde hair slightly mussed, his suit clinging to his frame. "You're late," Caleb called out, his voice teasing but warm, cutting through the rain's steady drumbeat. Ethan skidded to a stop, breathless, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. "Yeah, well, some of us don't have chauffeurs. Rich boy." Caleb's laugh was soft, but his eyes held a flicker of worry. "You okay? You look like you ran through a war zone." Ethan wiped the rain from his face, his grin lopsided. "Just another day in paradise. You should try it sometime, keeps you humble." They stood there, the space between them charged with the kind of energy that made the air feel alive. Ethan wanted to close the distance, to pull Caleb into his arms and forget the world. But hesitation lingered. Caleb's life was a maze of expectations: family, colleagues, a society that demanded perfection. Ethan's was a fight for survival, scraping by in a cramped apartment above the garage, his dreams buried under bills and regrets. "Walk with me?" Caleb asked, tilting his umbrella toward Ethan. Ethan nodded, stepping under the umbrella's shelter, their shoulders brushing as they moved through the park. The rain muffled the city's noise, creating a bubble where only they existed. Caleb's hand grazed Ethan's, a fleeting touch that sent warmth through Ethan's chilled skin. It was these moments, small, stolen, perfect, that kept them coming back, despite the odds. But the odds were never far away. Caleb's phone buzzed, a sharp reminder of the world waiting to pull him back. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. "My father," he muttered, silencing the call. "Another dinner I'm supposed to attend. Another chance to play the perfect son." Ethan's chest ached at the bitterness in Caleb's voice. He knew the weight of family pressure, though his own was a different kind: parents long gone, a sister struggling to make ends meet, and a life that demanded he keep moving, no matter how tired he was. "You don't have to go," Ethan said quietly. "You could stay with me." Caleb stopped walking, turning to face him. The umbrella tilted, letting rain slip through, but neither cared. "You make it sound so easy," Caleb said, his voice raw. "Like I could just walk away from everything: me family, my career, all of it." Maybe it is that easy. Ethan shot back, his tone sharper than he meant. Or maybe you're just scared to try? The words hung between them, heavy and dangerous. Caleb's eyes searched Ethan's, and for a moment, Ethan thought he'd pushed too far. But then Caleb stepped closer, his hand cupping Ethan's cheek, the touch grounding them both. I'm not scared of you, Caleb whispered. I'm scared of what happens if I lose you. Ethan's breath caught, the vulnerability in Caleb's voice unraveling him. He leaned in, their lips meeting in a kiss that tasted of rain and longing, a promise they both knew was fragile. The world could wait at least for tonight. But as they pulled apart, a shadow moved in the distance, barely noticeable through the rain. Someone was watching, their silhouette stark against the city's glow. Ethan's stomach twisted, a prickle of unease cutting through the warmth of the moment. He didn't know who it was, but he knew their love was a secret too big, too bright, to stay hidden forever. And secrets, in a city like this, had a way of tearing everything apart. The next morning, Ethan woke to the familiar hum of the garage below his apartment, the clatter of tools and shouted orders seeping through the thin walls. His tiny studio was a mess, grease-stained clothes on the floor, a half-empty coffee mug on the counter, but it was home. He lay in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, Caleb's kiss still lingering like a bruise on his heart. He replayed the previous night, the way Caleb's touch had anchored him, the way their worlds collided in that rain-soaked park. But that shadow in the distance haunted him. He'd brushed it off as paranoia, but the unease clung like damp clothes. Ethan wasn't naive. Love like theirs didn't go unnoticed in a city where eyes were everywhere, judging, calculating, waiting to pounce. Downstairs, the garage was already alive. Ethan pulled on his work boots, the soles worn thin from years of hustling. His boss, Frankie, a gruff man in his 50s with a soft spot for Ethan, clapped him on the shoulder as he clocked in. Late night. Kid. You look like hell. Ethan forced a grin. Just living the dream. Frankie. The day dragged. Each oil change, entire rotation a blur. But Ethan's mind was elsewhere. He kept checking his phone, hoping for a text from Caleb. But the screen stayed blank. Caleb's life was a whirlwind of meetings and obligations. A world Ethan could barely fathom. Still, the silence stung. By late afternoon, Ethan's hands were black with grease, his muscles aching, when his phone finally buzzed. A single message from Caleb, meet me at the diner on 7th. 8 p.m. Need to see you. Ethan's heart leapt, but the curtness of the text set him on edge. Caleb wasn't one for short messages. Something was wrong. The diner was a relic, its neon sign flickering above a row of cracked vinyl booths. Ethan arrived early, sliding into a corner booth, his fingers drumming on the sticky tabletop. When Caleb walked in, Ethan's breath caught. Caleb's suit was impeccable, but his face was drawn, shadows under his eyes. He slid into the booth, his knee brushing Ethan's under the table, a small comfort in the tension. What's going on? Ethan asked, keeping his voice low. The diner was half empty, but he felt exposed, like the walls themselves could betray them. Caleb leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. My father knows. About us. The words hit Ethan like a punch. How? Caleb's jaw clenched. Someone saw us last night. In the park. They sent him photos blurry. But enough. He cornered me this morning. Demanded to know who you are. Ethan's mind raced back to that shadow in the rain. His stomach churned. What did you tell him? Nothing, Caleb said, his voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't. He's not like your family. Ethan. He doesn't just disapprove, he destroys. Ethan knew a little about Caleb's father, Richard Thornton, a real estate mogul whose name was synonymous with power in Manhattan. The man didn't just live in a different world that owned it. Ethan had seen the way Caleb shrank when he talked about him. The weight of expectations crushing something vital inside him. "So what now?" Ethan asked, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. Caleb's eyes met his, raw and searching. "I don't know. He's threatening to cut me off me job, my trust fund, everything. But it's not about the money. It's about control. He thinks he can dictate who I am, who I love." Ethan reached across the table, his hand covering Caleb's. "He can't. Not this." Caleb's fingers tightened around his, but the fear in his eyes didn't fade. "You don't know him, Ethan. He'll come for you, too. Your job, your life, he'll find a way to make you pay for this." "Let him try," Ethan said, his voice fierce. "I've got nothing to lose." But that wasn't true, and they both knew it. Ethan had Caleb, and that was everything. The rest of the night passed in a haze of quiet words and stolen touches. The diners hummed a fragile shield against the storm brewing outside. They parted with a kiss in the alley behind the diner, the kind that promised forever but tasted of goodbye. Ethan walked home alone, the city's pulse thrumming in his ears, wondering how long they could keep running from a world determined to tear them apart. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of Caleb's father's threat hung over them like a storm cloud. Ethan threw himself into work, the garage his sanctuary. But even there, the world crept in. Whispers started among the other mechanics' looks that lingered too long, muttered comments about that rich guy Ethan was seeing. Word traveled fast in Brooklyn, and Ethan felt the walls closing in. Caleb, meanwhile, was unraveling. His texts grew sporadic, his voice strained when they spoke. Ethan could hear the exhaustion, the way his father's pressure was grinding him down. They met in secret now, in out-of-the-way cafes or empty subway stations, their moments together stolen and fleeting. Each time, Caleb seemed a little more distant, his smiles forced, his touches hesitant. One night, Ethan found Caleb waiting outside the garage, his car parked crookedly, his face pale under the streetlights. "I can't keep doing this," Caleb said, his voice breaking. "Hiding. Lying. It's killing me." Ethan's heart sank. "Then stop hiding. Tell him the truth. Tell everyone." Caleb laughed, a bitter sound. "You think it's that simple? My father's already got people watching us. He's got plans. Ethan plans to make sure I fall in line." Ethan stepped closer, his hands gripping Caleb's shoulders. "Then we fight. Together." Caleb's eyes softened, but the fear was still there. "You don't know what you're asking. He could ruin you. Your job, your sister's Plessy knows everything about you." The mention of his sister, Mia, sent a chill through Ethan. She was all he had left, scraping by in a tiny apartment in Queens, working double shifts as a nurse. The thought of her getting caught in this mess made Ethan's blood run cold. "He wouldn't," Ethan said, but his voice wavered. "He would," Caleb said quietly. "And he will, unless I walk away." Ethan's hands fell to his sides. "You mean walk away from me?" Caleb didn't answer, but the silence was answer enough. They stood there, the city's noise a cruel backdrop to their unraveling. Ethan wanted to scream, to beg, but pride held him back. "If that's what you want," he said finally, his voice hoarse, "then go." Caleb reached for him, but Ethan stepped back. "Don't," Ethan said. "Just don't." He turned and walked away, the ache in his chest sharper than anything he'd ever felt. The garage's familiar smells oil, metal, sweat offered no comfort as he climbed the stairs to his apartment. He collapsed onto his bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how love could feel so right and hurt so much. The next day, Ethan found a letter slipped under his door. No name, no signature, just a single line in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. Stay away from Caleb Thornton, or you'll lose everything. His hands shook as he read it, the words searing into his mind. He crumpled the paper, fury replacing fear. Whoever thought they could scare him off didn't know him at all. He grabbed his phone, typing a message to Caleb, "I'm not giving up. You in?" He hit send before he could second-guess himself, his heart pounding as he waited for a reply. Caleb's reply came hours later. A single word, yes. Ethan exhaled, relief flooding him, but it was tempered by the reality of what they were up against. They weren't just fighting Caleb's father, they were fighting a system, a city, a world that wanted to keep them apart. But Ethan was done running. They met that night in a rundown motel on the edge of the city, a place where no one asked questions. Caleb looked like he hadn't slept in days, his eyes red-rimmed, his suit replaced by a plain hoodie that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "I told him," Caleb said, his voice low. "I told him I love you." Ethan's heart stopped. "And?" He laughed. Caleb said, his voice cracking. "Said I'd come crawling back when I realized what I was giving up. Then he gave me an ultimatum, end it, or he'd make sure you lost everything, your job, your home, Mia's job." Ethan's fists clenched. "He's bluffing." "He's not," Caleb said. "He's already got people digging into your life. He knows about the garage, your landlord, Mia's hospital. He's not subtle, Ethan." Ethan paced the small room, the threadbare carpet muffling his steps. "So we fight dirty, too. You're a lawyer, use that. Find something on him." Caleb shook his head. "You don't think I've tried? He's untouchable. His money buys loyalty, silence, everything." "Then we go public," Ethan said, the idea forming as he spoke. "Tell the world. Let them see us two guys who love each other, not some dirty secret he can bury." Caleb stared at him, a mix of awe and fear in his eyes. "You're crazy." "Maybe," Ethan said, a grin tugging at his lips. "But I'm your kind of crazy." For the first time in days, Caleb smiled, a real one that reached his eyes. They spent the night planning, huddled together on the motel bed, their voices low but fierce. They'd go to the press, share their story, expose Richard Thornton's threats. It was a long shot, but it was theirs. The next morning, Ethan woke to find Caleb gone. A note on the pillow, "Had to handle something. Trust me. I love you." Ethan's stomach twisted, but he clung to those 3 words, a lifeline in the chaos. He went to work, trying to focus, but the garage felt different, tense. Frankie pulled him aside, his face grim. "Got a call from the landlord. He's raising the rent on your place. Says the building's under new management." Ethan's blood ran cold. "When?" "Yesterday," Frankie said. "Same day some suit came by, asking questions about you." Ethan didn't need to ask who was behind it. He grabbed his phone, dialing Caleb, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic clawed at him, but he pushed it down. He had to believe Caleb was fighting, too. That night, Ethan found a USB drive taped to his apartment door. No note, no explanation. He plugged it into his old laptop, his heart racing as a single video file loaded. It was grainy, but clear enough. Richard Thornton, in a private meeting, discussing payoffs to city officials. Evidence. Leverage. Ethan didn't know how Caleb had gotten it, but he knew what it meant. They had a weapon now, but using it would come at a cost. Ethan clutched the USB drive like it was a grenade, its weight both a promise and a threat. He hadn't heard from Caleb since the note, and every unanswered call tightened the knot in his chest. The video was damning proof of Richard Thornton's corruption. Enough to shake his empire, but using it meant declaring war. Ethan wasn't sure they could survive the fallout. He met Mia for coffee in Queens, needing her steady presence. His sister, 25 and tougher than she looked, sipped her latte and listened as Ethan spilled everything to love. The threats, the USB drive. Her eyes widened, but her voice was calm. You're in deep, Ethan. But you love him, don't you? More than anything, Ethan admitted, his voice rough. Then fight for it, Mia said. But be smart. This guy's not just rich, dangerous. Ethan nodded, the USB drive burning a hole in his pocket. He spent the day reaching out to contacts old friends from the neighborhood, a journalist he'd met at the bar, anyone who might help. By nightfall, he had a plan: leak the video anonymously to a local news outlet. Let the press do the rest. It was risky, but it was their only shot. Caleb finally called that evening, his voice frantic. Ethan, where are you? At home, Ethan said, relief flooding him. Where are you? I got the USB. Don't do anything with it. Caleb cut in. Not yet. I'm coming to you. Just stay put. Ethan waited, pacing his tiny apartment. The city's hum a distant roar. When Caleb arrived, he looked like a ghost, pale, disheveled, his eyes haunted. I stole it, he said, collapsing onto Ethan's couch. From my father's office. He doesn't know yet, but he will. Ethan knelt beside him, his hands framing Caleb's face. You did this for us. For you, Caleb said, his voice breaking. I can't let him win. They held each other, the USB drive between them, a fragile hope in a world that felt like it was crumbling. They agreed to leak the video, but not before taking precautions: backups, encrypted copies, a plan to protect Mia. Ethan contacted his journalist friend, Sarah, who promised to handle the story with care. This is big, she said, but it's going to piss off a lot of powerful people. The story broke the next morning. A local news site running a grainy clip of Richard Thornton's meeting. The headline screaming corruption. Ethan watched it spread like wildfire, his phone buzzing with notifications. Caleb sat beside him, his hand in Ethan's. Both of them braced for what came next. By noon, Richard Thornton's office released a statement denying everything, calling the video a fabrication. But the damage was done. Reporters were digging, and the city was talking. Ethan felt a flicker of triumph, but it was short-lived. A text from Frankie came through. Landlord's evicting you. Sorry, kid. Ethan's heart sank. He turned to Caleb, whose face was a mask of guilt. This is my fault, Caleb said. I should have known he'd hit back. No, Ethan said fiercely. This is his fault. And we're not done fighting. They spent the night planning their next move, knowing the war was far from over. But for the first time, Ethan felt like they were on equal footing: a mechanic and a lawyer. Two men against the world, bound by a love that refused to break. The eviction notice was taped to Ethan's door the next morning, stark and final. He had a week to vacate. No explanation given beyond lease violations. The garage was next. Frankie confided that the new landlord, a shell company tied to Richard Thornton, was pressuring him to fire Ethan or lose the property. The noose was tightening, and Ethan felt it around his neck. Caleb was a wreck, guilt eating at him. They crashed at a friend's apartment in Brooklyn, a temporary refuge while they figured out their next steps. Ethan watched Caleb pace, his lawyer's mind racing, searching for a legal loophole, a way to fight back. But Ethan's mind was elsewhere: in survival, on protecting Mia, on keeping their love from becoming collateral damage. We go bigger, Ethan said finally, his voice steady. The video's out there, but it's not enough. We need to tell our story. Let people see who we are, what we're fighting for. Caleb stopped pacing, his eyes wide. You mean come out? Publicly? Yeah, Ethan said. No more hiding. Let's show the world what he's trying to destroy. It was a gamble, but Caleb agreed. They reached out to Sarah, who connected them with a progressive news outlet eager for their story. The interview was set for the next day, a live stream that would put their faces and their lovey on display for the world to see. The studio was small, the lights harsh, but Ethan felt oddly calm as he sat beside Caleb, their hands clasped under the table. The interviewer, a woman named Lena with a kind smile, asked about their relationship, their struggles, the threats they'd faced. Ethan spoke first, his voice raw but steady, telling the world about the mechanic who fell for a lawyer, about a love that didn't care about money or status. Caleb followed, his words polished but heartfelt, exposing his father's threats, the pressure to conform, the fear of losing everything. The stream went viral, their story spreading across social media like a beacon. Messages poured in support, anger, solidarity. For every hateful comment, there were 10 more cheering them on, calling them heroes, proof that love could defy even the most powerful forces. Ethan felt a swell of hope, but he knew the fight wasn't over. Richard Thornton's retaliation was swift. By evening, Caleb's firm had suspended him, citing conflicts of interest. Ethan's landlord doubled down, sending movers to clear out his apartment. Mia called. Frantic, her hospital was auditing her. A clear message from Thornton's network. The world was watching, but so was their enemy, and he wasn't backing down. That night, they sat on the fire escape of their friend's apartment, the city sprawling below them. Caleb leaned against Ethan, his voice soft. I didn't know it would feel like this. Free, but terrifying. Ethan wrapped an arm around him. We're in this together. Whatever happens. Caleb nodded, but his eyes were distant. I just wish I could protect you. You are, Ethan said. By being here. By fighting. They kissed under the stars, the city's chaos fading for a moment. But as they pulled apart, Ethan saw a car idling across the street, its tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. He didn't say anything, but the chill in his gut told him they were still being watched. The car became a constant shadow, appearing outside the garage, the friend's apartment, even Mia's hospital. Ethan and Caleb moved constantly, staying with friends, crashing in cheap motels, their lives reduced to a backpack each. The city that had once felt like home now seemed like a battlefield, every corner hiding a threat. But their story had taken on a life of its own. Protests sprang up outside Richard Thornton's office, activists chanting for justice, for love, for an end to corruption. Ethan and Caleb became symbols, their faces on signs, their names trending online. It was exhilarating and terrifying. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore. They were fighting for everyone who'd ever been told their love was wrong. Sarah, the journalist, became their lifeline, feeding them updates on the investigation into Richard Thornton. The video had sparked a federal probe, and whispers of indictments were growing louder. But Thornton was slippery, his lawyers spinning stories, his money buying time. Ethan knew they needed Moria's final blow to bring him down. Caleb, ever the strategist, dug into his father's past, using old contacts to uncover dirt. Late one night, in a cramped motel room, he found it, a paper trail linking Thornton to a decade-old land deal, one that had displaced hundreds of low-income families. It wasn't just unethical, it was illegal and provable. We've got him, Caleb said, his eyes blazing with a fire Ethan hadn't seen in weeks. This could end it. They worked with Sarah to leak the documents, careful to cover their tracks. The story hit the next morning, Front page news across the city. Thornton's empire began to crack, stock prices plummeted. Clients pulled out, and the feds moved in. Ethan watched it unfold on a borrowed laptop, his heart pounding. They'd done it. They'd fought back. But victory came at a cost. Caleb's suspension became a termination, his career in ruins. Ethan's apartment was gone, his belongings in storage, his job hanging by a thread. Mia's audit cleared, but the stress had taken its toll. She was exhausted, angry, scared for her brother. Ethan felt the weight of it all, the lives he'd upended for a chance at freedom. That night, Caleb sat across from him in a diner, their hands intertwined. Was it worth it? Caleb asked, his voice barely audible. Ethan looked into his eyes, seeing the man he loved, the man he'd fought for. You're worth it, he said. We're worth it. Caleb smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. I just want a life with you. A real one. Not this. Running. Hiding. Fighting. We'll get there, Ethan promised, though he wasn't sure how. As they left the diner, the car was there again, closer this time. Ethan's heart raced, but he grabbed Caleb's hand, pulling him down the street. They weren't running anymore, they were standing tall, together, no matter what came next. The news broke on a crisp autumn morning. Richard Thornton had been arrested, charged with fraud and corruption. The city buzzed with the story, headlines screaming of his downfall. Ethan and Caleb watched it unfold from a friend's couch, the TV casting flickering light across their faces. It was over, so they thought. The weeks that followed were a blur. Thornton's trial loomed, and while the evidence was overwhelming, his lawyers were relentless, painting Ethan and Caleb as opportunists, liars, destroyers of a family legacy. The hate mail came in waves, but so did the support letters, donations, strangers stopping them on the street to say they'd inspired them to live authentically. Ethan found a new apartment, a tiny studio in Brooklyn, paid for with savings and help from friends. Caleb, blacklisted from corporate law, took a job with a nonprofit, fighting for tenants' rights. It paid a fraction of his old salary, but he came home every night with a spark in his eyes, a purpose Ethan hadn't seen before. Mia, too, found her footing, her hospital offering her a promotion after the audit cleared. They rebuilt, piece by piece, their lives intertwining in ways they'd never dared dream. They cooked dinner in Ethan's cramped kitchen, laughed over cheap wine, and fell asleep tangled together. The cities hum a lullaby. The car stopped following them. The threats faded, and for the first time, they felt free. One evening, as the sun set over the skyline, Ethan took Caleb back to their park, the place where it all began. The oak tree still stood, its leaves golden in the autumn light. Ethan pulled a small box from his pocket, his hands shaking. Inside was a simple silver ring, bought with every penny he'd saved. Caleb Thornton, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't have much. No penthouse, no empire. Just me, and this promise to love you, no matter what. Caleb's eyes glistened, his hand trembling as he took the ring. You're all I want, he said, pulling Ethan into a kiss that felt like a vow. They didn't have everything. The world still judged, still pushed back. But they had each other, and that was enough. Their love, born in a city that tried to break them, had defied wealth, poverty, and power. It wasn't perfect, but it was there's a story written in rain-soaked nights, stolen kisses, and a courage that refused to bend. As they walked hand in hand through the park, the city around them alive with possibility, Ethan knew they'd face more battles. But together, they could face anything. Two men, one love, and a future they'd fight for, every single day.